In the original lore, they're referred to as gypsies, and I know there are some negative connotations with that word, but that's just what they were called in the original module. They were loosely analogous to the Romani of the real world, travelers. There's no disrespect meant with any of this. This is all in the source lore. I think it's generally agreed that the best book, or the best description of the Vistani, actually is in one of the older publications. I believe it was in Ravenloft Realm of Terror, the black box set. It was probably the best description of the Vistani, and it was very in-depth and it was long. This wasn't just a paragraph or two, like it was in the I6 module, where they were specifically just called gypsies. The word Vistani hadn't even been invented yet. But this was a marvelous description of these people, I think. And here's some of it. The gypsies of Ravenloft, or Vistani as they call themselves, are mysterious people. They wander the lands and travel the mists independent of the bonds which shackle lords to their domains and natives to their dreary, oppressed existence. In some ways, they are the most powerful characters in Ravenloft because in spirit the gypsies are free. Like the gypsies in other realms, Vistani have dark skin. They dress in vibrant clothing and rarely linger in any location. Their hair is black and shining, though some are born with amber tresses. Their eyes are black and luminous, and in a few tribes are of a shape that suggests a distant link to the Orient. But it is more than physical appearance that defines a Vistana. The gypsies in Ravenloft are unique. No ordinary gypsy who wanders into the demiplane shares the mystical powers of the Vistani of Ravenloft. Vistani have an ageless and timeless quality. True, their babes grow to be men and women, and their men and women grow old, but many elders seem to have lived for centuries, and it is as if they have distanced themselves from time, just enough to slow its disintegration of their bodies and stop its erosion of their minds. Perhaps they become independent of time. To the gypsies, time is not an accidental sequence of cause or effect, or a linear track which they are forced to follow. It is an intricate web, in which threads of the future are closely entwined with those of the past. To gypsy seers, an event with seemingly no relationship to one another can become a window to another place in time, a window which opens for the gypsies alone. And only Vistani can tell the future in Ravenloft. A tiny crystal becomes an object from which the gypsy can hear an inner vision of things to come. Cards, when touched by any person and turned by a gypsy, can tell events that lie in that person's past as well as his future. And some gypsies read palms, others cast bones or gaze at tea leaves in the bottom of a cup. In some, the gift of seeing is so strong that they need only close their eyes and a vision appears. Every Vistani has the potential to see the future, but not all have an equal ability to use this gift. Many dark-eyed wanderers have the power to cure as well as to curse. Some of their talents involve rituals or potions. Certain lizards in the Balanox, for example, help create a gypsy brew of wondrous powers of healing. The fruits of Barovia, when sliced in a given way under a certain moon, are rumored to form the basis of a deadly curse. Only Vistani know the precise details, but some gypsies need no props to harm or heal. They need only their own gaze and the powers of the evil eye. The evil eye is the ability to cast an enchantment with only a look. It is the most common among women, and seems to increase with age. Old gypsy women whose hair has gone white and whose teeth have gone completely may command the greatest of respect. Their curses, when the will is strong, are said to rival the powers of Ravenloft. Usually, however, a gypsy curse is embarrassing or dangerous rather than deadly. Only a fool crosses the Vistani, because every crime against their kind, no matter how secret, may return to haunt the offender. Even offenses against the dead can be dangerous. It is said that he who robs the body of a gypsy, especially with malice, may find that his fingers have turned black the following morn. The blackness cannot be washed away. Every living Vistani knows this sign and will recognize the bearer as an enemy of gypsy tribes. With repeated wrongs, the blackness may spread until the offending flesh begins to fall away like that of a leper. So say the gypsies, at least. The Vistani are gifted explorers, and they can enter the misty border and determine where and when they shall leave it. According to legend, they can even enter and leave the demiplane of Dread itself, though some say it is only because they know of portals that no others have discovered. If a Giorgio or non-Vistana wins their confidence, the Vistani may allow him or her to travel with them. No Vistana can be forced to act as a guide, however, nor can any Giorgio stow away on a caravan and hope to escape the demiplane. The The Vistani are apparently protected from the mist. Like chaff that is culled from wheat, the mists of Ravenloft will separate unwanted followers from the full-blooded Vistani and send them different ways. Vistani have little to fear from the rulers of Ravenloft's domains, and most lords tolerate them. Many are in awe of their powers, for the Vistani ability to travel the mists and foretell the future commands great respect. Some lords even forge agreements with the tribes. Count Strahd von Zarovich, for example, formed an alliance with the Vistana Madame Eva many years ago. He gave her the potion of immunity to his choking fog, and today nearly all Vistani know this formula. They charge travelers 10 gold pieces apiece for a drink of the potion and then ferry them across Barovia. In return for the Count's cooperation, Vistani informs Strahd of the activities in other domains, and they act as spies for him in his own. Now for me, this is one of the best descriptions I've read of a people, especially in this setting, particularly in the domains of dread. They really portray the Vistani as this semi-mystical people that, are allowed to kind of wander through the misty lands of the domains of dread and Barovia, unmolested, unlike other peoples that happen to come through the mist, and it usually ends very badly for them. So they're like a people apart, almost. And the description was just so charming in its details about their culture and their lives that it just really paints this amazing picture. And I really appreciated that going through this module. And I try to portray them as accurately as I can whenever I have a game with my players. So while this is my favorite description of the Vistani, it's the one that speaks to me most as a people and their history. It has changed significantly, but this is the general outline we can adhere to, at least culturally. I think it's actually rather fantastic what they've done with this edition. Another very old but very important and I think essential repository of lore for the Vistani is, of course, Van Nurken's Guide to the Vistani, published in 1995. This kind of supplementary lore kind of really filled in a lot of the nooks and crannies of the Vistani, particularly when it comes to how they organize themselves and their history and the legends that they tell themselves. An interesting thing is that the Vistani are, of course, consummate wanderers, and they have this spirit of freedom and wanderlust that kind of permeates every fiber of their being. But all of them have something in common. They all have a history, the story that they tell each other when they settle down for the night. Every night before a bonfire, they perform this ritual that they call Prastinata. And that's where, the Vistani sing and they dance and they entertain the children until the children go to sleep. And then after that, when the fires kind of died down and it leaves behind these ruddy waves of red and orange, the musicians will rest and the tribal elders will begin the Dorok. And that's the telling of the tales of the homes they left behind. And that is one thing that binds all of the Vistani together, all of the different tribes. And they all have this story of the homeland that they were forced to leave behind. So there are 3 primary Vistani nations called tasks. These 3 nations that we can kind of refer to are the Kaldresh, and these are the providers of services. So these are like the craftsmen, right? The everyday animal husbandry, building of the Vardos, and all of that. These are the guys that do all that stuff. The Bohemians are the entertainers and the storytellers. And then the Manusa are the workers of arcane powers, so the ones that practice magic. Now, in addition to there being 3 nations, the Vistani in particular, there are 3 dominant Vistani legends that they all kind of recite and tell each other over the years that have survived this entire time in the lore. And the first one is the tale of the vanquished conqueror. So this is a tale of a great subjugator who led the Vistani far from their homes only to abandon them to fate. And this story is eloquently recited with only slight variations by the Kami, the Ekwar, and the Vitroski tribes, which are all members of the Kaldresh. Of particular interest in the following myth is the name of the conqueror, Vistan, from which the Kaldresh derived the name given to them by Georgios. So the tale of Vistan is as follows. Vistan was not our king, nor was he our enemy, but his ambition was great and his army mighty. Westward we marched before thousands of legions to conquer the world and make it his own. Vistan was not our king, nor was he our enemy, but his resources were great and his army well provisioned. Westward we followed him to forge his weapons, or shoe his horses, or heal his wounded. depending on the tribe telling the particular story. Vistani was not our king, nor was he our enemy. His cause was not ours, nor were his spoils of war. Yet his defeat was thrust upon us. In the land called Transil, the conqueror was crushed by warriors of a nameless god, and all his legions were made slaves. We were not ourselves brought into bondage, for Vistani was not our king, but neither were we allowed to return to the home forge, for the Transilites decreed that none should return with word of what had befallen Vistani and his armies. Vistani they named us, and made us beggars, and promised they would murder us if our Vardos ever faced east. Then Caldrith rose among us and spoke of a vision which taught him that the world was round, and he promised we should find the home forge if we continued always moving west. Vistani was not our king, nor was he our enemy, yet forever we bear his name and his fate, for the world is truly flat, and we shall never see our homeland again. The second legend that the Vistani tell among themselves is even probably sadder than the first. It's called the Splintering, and it's a bit of a poem, or maybe a song, but it goes, "Why do you wander, O maker of music? Why do your strings weep? Why do you starve? Because I have no home, because I have no hope, because I have no harvest to reap. Where are your roots, O wandering slave? Where are your ancestors? Where are your gardens of plenty? Torn from the soil and torn from the memory, torn from the feeble hands of my children. How can this be, O tearful wretch? How can this happen? How can this go on? Because I murdered my friend, because I murdered my comfort, because I murdered my place in the sun. Why did you do this, O miserable one? Why did you murder? Why did you kill one you called friend? He stole my true love, he stole my own heart, he stole my only reason to live. What will you do, O cursed fool? What will you suffer? What will you do to make amends? Nothing but wander, nothing but starve, nothing but play my melancholy violin. When will it end, O pitiable fetch? When will it rest? When will it all be over for you? Never, 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 never." And apparently this particular legend or song is attributed to the Boam task, or the Boam Taskes. And they are more prone to lash out at the world, for these are bitter over their lot, even though they would not accept another lifestyle. The Bohemians are largely responsible for the Vistani reputation for being thieves and cutthroats, if any such infamy is deserved. Now the last nation of Vistani, the Menusa, they have their own tale, and it is called the War for All Time. And in peace and joy all mortals lived among the gods, in a land of eternal light above the void. Together they shared a love of creation, together they made the universe in which to dance the prostonata and multiply. The gods created all the lands, while mortals forged many an artifice with which to tend them. But the gods reserved their creation of time to themselves, saying it was not a mortal's lot to have power over the past and the future, but only to live in the present. Mortals were content with that, for the universe held everything they ever needed to live in peace and joy. And out of the void came dark powers, the shadows of the gods, who whispered in mortals' ears, telling them that they would be gods themselves if they controlled the past and the future. They inflamed mortals' hearts with visions of power and made them fearful of the gods, fearful of their lack of control over time. At last the mortals and the dark powers joined to make war against the gods for all time. Only Menusa, mother of our task, defied her mortal kind and stood with the gods. Though the mortals and the shadows of the gods lacked the power to overthrow the gods, their destruction across the universe was terrible, which smote the gods to their hearts. In the end, the gods enabled Menusa to see the past and the future, that she might walk among the mortals and forecast the doom of their creation and the end of the universe. Then the mortals were ashamed. Then they rejected the whisperings of the dark powers. They begged forgiveness of the gods. The dark powers were driven back to the void. When peace and joy returned to the land of eternal light, the gods regretted telling the secrets of time to Menusa, but they could not take back what they had been freely given. So they joined with the mortals and drove Menusa from the land, cast her into the void, and gave her to the dark powers who clamored for revenge. But Menusa would not give up. Menusa would not die, and Menusa wandered in the void alone, fearless of all beings, for she could see the future, and she foresaw that the gods and the mortals would not coexist forever. Manusa saw that the spiteful gods would eventually cast all mortals from the land of eternal light and abandon them in the universe they had created. And she laughed at the miserable fate of both gods and mortals. We are the children of Manusa. We are neither mortal nor divine. We are wanderers in the world and through the void. We are unknown to mortals and unfettered by gods. We are merchants on the road of time, selling the past to gods and the future to mortals. We are the children of Manusa. And the Manusa are typically described as being both frightening and alluring, personifying the mystique that all Vistani possess. So here we can see that almost every aspect of Vistani culture and their life is highly ritualized. From the Prastonata and the Dorok, just to the setting and striking of camp, is a ritual in and of itself. How they season their food in their cooking pots is made in a triangular motion, symbolizing the path of nourishment from the ground to the plant to the body. It's all a ritual with the Vistani. So the typical day for a Vistani would go like this. Once they find a suitable campsite, the captain of the camp, or maybe the Ruani, but it's normally the captain who is the Ruani's male counterpart, will basically find a suitable campsite after measuring it out and pacing it with his own legs. And then he will find the center of the campsite, stride to it, and then declare Kir Yag, which loosely translates into make fire. And it might not be a literal command, but it's mostly metaphorical. And if possible, the captain will not move from this position in the middle of the campsite until all of the Vardo's animals and tribesmen have been instructed on where they should proceed for the rest of the evening. When the caravan finally comes to a rest, the female leader, called the Ruani, joins the captain at the center of the camp and confirms his choice, of course. Now, it is mentioned that in rare occasions the Ruani might object to this choice of campsite. It's very rare, but it does happen, in which case she has the last say. So the captain might like the spot, but if the Ruani does not, then they have to basically pack up and find another campsite. Of course, we went over the Prastonata, which is the dancing and celebrating around the ritual fire in the middle of the Vistani camp. This is what we typically associate with images of the Vistani, right? So this is normally just a form of entertainment and stress relief for the Vistani, and it's almost a way of storytelling as well. So the interesting thing about the Prastonata is that it's a form of dance, but the Vistani do not dance to the music. It's rather the music follows the dance of the Vistani. And it's a living metaphor for them. It's a constant flowing hypnotic motion that reflects the life of these people, who never stay long enough to call any one place home. So there's hardly a pause in the Prastona's dance on which a viewer may seize before it melts away into a turn and a flurry of hair from the moment she poses from the first note of the violin to the final twirl and collapse to the ground. The Dorok follows, with the elders and sometimes visitors being allowed to tell stories. And these are mostly tales of love, heroism, tragedy, time, and countless other subjects, and of course their oral history. Now, with the three different nations of the Vistani, they all know each other's legends as well as their own, which is remarkable, really. And sometimes they will debate the faults and merits of each other's tribal stories in the event that they do get a chance to meet. Other rituals the Vistani recognize and perform are moon rituals in particular, and they observe these rituals entirely as far away from other population centers as they can. Non-Vistana are not allowed to attend these, and they will go through quite a bit of trouble to make sure that these rituals are done away from other population centers, right, of Giorgio's, non-Vistani. The 3 days that the moon is in full phase are called full tide. So during this time, the Vistani seek to bring all matters in their lives to fruition. They try to basically come everything to completion. Like when a Vistani or a Vistana makes a promise to do something, they will punctuate the pledge by declaring Lunadi, meaning literally by the moon. And figuratively, it shall be done. So in essence, she is promising the task will be done before the moon is full, although the actual terms of the agreement may be altogether different. So Lunadi is like a figure of speech, right? It's like, it's not literal. It's kind of like the Giorgio habit of saying, I swear on my honor, instead of saying, it is really true, believe me. So the Lunaset is a moon ritual that is done on the last night of the nights of the full tide. There's 3 nights to the full tide, so on the very last night, the Lunaset takes place. And this is a very strange ritual. So during this rite, the entire tribe will basically file into the forest at midnight, wherever their camp is, when the moon is directly overhead. At dawn, as the moon sets, they will re-emerge from the darkness, haggard and introspective, and go straight to bed to sleep until noon. When at last they rise, the Vistani seem as jovial as if nothing had ever happened to them. What they do out there in the woods on the 3rd night of the full moon is a mystery. No one knows. It is theorized that perhaps they renew their strange and myriad powers with some ancient pact or cryptic ceremony that they have to keep secret to work. And finally, with the Lunaset being the final ritual, there is a great festival that takes place the following day. The Vistani will play games and simply relax for the rest of that day. Speaking a little bit about their organization, we of course know that there are 3 Vistani nations and that each of these nations is comprised of individual tribes. All of them are almost identical to each other, with slight differences. So there are dozens of individuals inside of a Vistani caravan, and they all live inside of these barrel-topped Vardos, which are wagons that are all constructed the same way, from tribe to tribe, nation to nation. They are all colorful, and they're kind of like mobile homes, right? The Vistani take great pride in their Vardos and in their craftsmanship and in their taking, and kind of in their maintenance. So we've already spoken about how each tribe of the Vistani has a captain, who is the male kind of patriarch figure, and the Raoni, which is the female kind of matriarch figure. This relationship is not equal. So the Raoni enjoy powers of prescience, right? They can see the future, and this grants them a considerable amount of power within the tribe. They are responsible at the end of the day. They have the last word. The buck stops with the Raoni. Hers is the right to pronounce and inflict punishment, and she is often the treasurer of her people as well, holding their most valuable treasures and gifts and items. That doesn't mean that the captain doesn't do anything. He's occupied with the day-to-day rigors of the road, right? The animal husbandry, he has to see to the horses, the practical aspects of day-to-day life in a Vistani tribe or a Vistani camp in Vardos is the purview of the captain. Now, I have mentioned the word Giorgio a number of times, and this is an exclusionary word. It basically means anyone who is not Vistani. The Vistani are actually quite prickly about who gets to be Vistani and not. And Giorgios are always, the closest a outsider can ever get to the Vistani is to become a Giogotto, which is an enlightened one, but you're not of the blood. So this is an extremely high honor among the Vistani, and it's the basically highest you can attain or aspire to as a non-Vistani. Everyone else is a Giorgio, and that's all they'll ever be. Having this kind of status among the Vistani will kind of grant you some perks. A Giogotto is never swindled or lied to by, Vistani that can identify him as such. And they are never treated as part of the tribes. There's really no sense of camaraderie. They feel tolerated. It's more the best that they can aspire to. And, of course, these Giogottos, they might be with the Vistani for a while, but they'll never develop any of the Vistani's powers, such as the evil eye. They'll never participate in Lunaset or any of the other rituals that the Vistani kind of participate in. But it's a step up from being a Giorgio. The tribes are said to live mostly off the land, being a nomadic people. They, are pretty proficient at foraging for fruits, berries, herbs, and they do supplement their diet with a bit of meat that they can get. They are not quite natural-born hunters. They might aspire to being some poaching every now and then, but it is said that they do fish with nets, and so fish does make up quite a bit of their diet. Although one of their favorites is a bit of hedgehog, which they will take bits of the meat and stick them onto these wooden skewers and roast them over an open fire. That's considered a bit of a favorite among their kind. Water is actually the common drink of the Vistani, not wine or anything brewed. They will drink it sometimes when they're conducting business with Giorgios to kind of seal pacts or deals. They prefer to remain lucid and alert at all times, which is might be a little bit surprising to people. It's almost considered supernatural. The Vistani can identify plants and animals in pure water with perfect accuracy. Other kind of things that are almost considered semi-magical among the Vistani is particularly the captain. He supervises, in gathering firewood for his caravan when he's setting up the camp. He is also responsible for starting the communal fire in the center of the camp. And it is said that no matter how wet the wood, it could be wet seaweed, and all he could have is a piece of flint, and it could be raining and snowing, let the wind howl in the pit, he will have the fire going momentarily. And no one knows how this is accomplished, but it's almost mystical in its just his sheer ability to always start the fire. And supposedly this skill extends to other Vistani as well. It's not just the captain, it's just that it's more his responsibility, but everybody can do it. You might think that privacy might be a hard thing to come by when people live so closely, like the Vistani do. The Vistani have a curious custom. They are free to come and go as they please in the camp, of course, but to be alone when you're in the presence of so many other tribesmen, all the Vistana has to do is clasp his hands before him. And as long as he continues this gesture, the tribe will simply ignore him, like he's not there. They'll just pretend he doesn't exist. And only the greatest of emergencies can induce them to speak to him, to break this kind of cultural taboo that they have. Among the Vistani, love is one of the most personal matters in the extreme. And it is quite difficult for young Vistani to get together and start families of their own. One tribe would pretty much have to get lucky enough to run into another tribe of the same task, right? And see if there's any available, wives or husbands available from that other tribe when they cross paths. And given that Vistani migratory patterns, they vary from tribe to tribe, but an amazing thing about their migratory patterns is that they are constant. They are always the same. These migratory patterns might take a season, a year, a couple of years, a decade to complete, but they will always follow the same route. And so during these migrations, they're bound to always run into the other members of the task or the tribes. And it's pretty much during this period where unwed Vistani are basically given their opportunity to try and start a family. When love does occur, the parents of the prospective mates kind of make inquiries of each other to see if, this kind of arrangement is going to be possible. They'll discuss property rights. And the last thing is that the children are formally asked if that match would please them. So it's not just an arranged marriage, right? And if the answer is yes on both parts, then plans for the marriage are forged in earnest. Along with weddings, there are also death and funeral rites that the Vistani have that are bizarre by most other people's standards. So a Vistana never dies in his bed. The Vistani believe that they have to shield their caravans from the taint of death. Ritualistically, they have expelled the Grim Reaper from their midst, and perhaps there is something more than superstition in this belief, for they sleep comfortably under the stars night after night, while the rest of us seek shelter behind bolted doors and shutters. So they have a prohibition against seeing another Vistani die. It cannot happen. So if a person in the tribe is about to die, the Vistani will use all of their energy, their last dying breath, to basically leave the camp when they feel death come upon them, so that none of the Vistani will see them actually die. This has to take place, and it's considered an extremely bad omen if you do actually see a Vistani die, because apparently this can manifest itself into the appearance of a Geist. So a Geist is a type of undead, well, a type of ghost really, that follows a character or a PC around. And it makes doing business with people extremely difficult when there is a dead Vistana following this person around, like interfering in all their daily business. It's extremely difficult. People will think that you're cursed, or it's no one wants to do business with you when this happens. So this can result as a result of seeing a Vistana die, which is why all the Vistani in the tribe know to turn away, or basically to pretend like the person's not there when their great grandpa's dying in the bushes a couple of feet from the camp. It's insane. They even go so far as to not even, they pretend that they didn't even see the person leave the camp, right? They just kind of, oh, there goes Uncle Bob. He doesn't look too good. I don't think Uncle Bob's going to make it, and then he goes off and dies in the weeds somewhere. One of their last beliefs around death is that the Vistani believe that one who has died in shame cannot leave this world. And so a dead Vistana reputedly will just follow the last person who saw him die around until the offending voyeur dies. That's something, isn't it? The death of Giorgio, however, doesn't bother them in the least. They don't care if outsiders die. When one of their members does die, or is about to die, the Ruani will light a candle and places it in the window of her Vardo, and they'll wait. When the candle goes out, that is taken as an omen that that tribe member has died. So when Uncle Bob wanders off into the bushes because he knows he's about to die and everyone pretends not to see him, the Ruani will light a candle, leave it in the window of her Vardo, and then when that person dies, the candle will go out, and that's when they'll know to start the mourning process. So the entire tribe, the men, the women, and the children will break out into a terrible wailing. Sometimes they just yell at the heavens, and even young children will cry as if they're being beaten. Darkness will fall across the camp, and this grieving will give its way over into an eerie rhythmic chanting. Shadows will play about the trees and the forest all around them, and the wind will sigh like a ghostly violin. The Vistani believe that this is the spirit of the departed visiting his tribe once last time before moving onward. The last thing that the person, their family, their tribal members will do is that the tribesmen will gather all of the personal effects or the items that belong to that Vistana in life and burn it in the central fire of their campsite. And this is said to conjure up images, maybe in the swirling smoke of the departed Vistana, dancing one last time around the campfire. One of the reasons why the Vistani can do all of these things in such utter secrecy that it's almost impossible to see any of their rituals, even something as common as something like a funeral or a marriage, is that it is almost impossible to tell if the Vistani caravan has crossed your path or not. Even elven rangers are hard-pressed to discover these trails, and let alone follow them. When the Vistani break camp, they remove every single trace of their occupation. They bury their bonfire ashes, they disguise the overturned earth with natural camouflage, they pick up every last speck, so that any rumor of their presence is completely gone. Even the tracks of the Vardo seem to blow away in an easy breeze, almost as if they are mystically hiding themselves from being trapped by anyone wishing to try and catch up with them. It's nearly impossible. Some people speculate that the reason why the Vistani do this is because they're forever on the run, right? Thieves and bandits, a life of crime, but this isn't true. The Vistani, like anybody else, they're not strictly good or evil, but the Vistani, more than other races, seem to be strictly, not neutral, but natural. They believe in the natural order of things. They are not lawful nor unlawful. They're not good or evil. Their philosophy reflects nature itself, wherein there is a perfect balance of all things, and that is the ideal. Kind of like druids in that sense. Even the word Giorgio kind of translates, it means foreigner, but it translates more as as the word unnatural, lacking any better term. And the opposite is of Giorgio is Vistani, natural. Well, the actual meaning of Vistani is a thinking person in their paterna or their language. To use Rudolf van Richten's words, he said that in a sense calling the Vistani evil by Giorgio's standards is comparable to calling quicksand diabolical, blight calculated, plague intentional. In a cruel world, it is apparently natural to be cruel as well. The wolf is a natural creature, and so is the Vistana. Directly from Mr. Rudolf van Richten. Touching on their beliefs on law and justice, they do have a notion of justice, and it has a word in their language, and it is Vishnad. It means dark blade. A Vistana will often cry Vishnad when he has exacted revenge or emerged victorious from any given situation, but in cases of dispute or accusation, the term takes on its formal meaning. So all the Vistani consider the Vishnad deadly serious, and woe to him who scoffs or scorns it. In practice, the Ruani is normally the arbiter of these disputes. She is the judge, the jury, and sometimes the executioner. So she will normally formally listen to a case between two Vistani, or maybe even a Giorgio and a Vistani that just unfortunately happened to be captured by them. But she will have her obsidian-edged blade in her lap, literally a black blade, and she will listen to both sides of the dispute. Now, the Vistani know that the Ruani is prescient, right? Can see the future, and they believe that she is beyond deception, that she cannot be wrong. So they accept any action she takes without question, no matter how extreme. So in matters of dispute, both the adversaries approach the Ruani, they stand before her and offer their open hands. Neither of them is allowed to speak until she places her dagger against the palms of their hands, and then she will ask them questions, and in this way she gets answers from them. Once she's heard both sides of the argument, she will preside or present her judgment to them, and they always accept this without any complaint or any hard feelings or anything. Both Vistani will accept her judgment. Now, there are also very rare occasions where there is a trial by combat situation emerges. It's a very interesting type of duel or trial by combat that these people have. So what happens is that the two contestants basically are stripped down to the waist, and they are given these quill feathers that have been, I believe they're pheasant feathers, that have been dipped in an herbal poison. They slash at each other with these feathers, and when the poison contacts the bare skin, it actually forces their muscles to tense up and to become still, and it paralyzes people that come into contact with this poison. It will ultimately result in unconsciousness, and the first person to fall unconscious or concede the match loses the judgment or the trial by combat. An elegant way to settle disputes, don't you think? In matters of patching judgment against Giorgio, because the Ruani, she's ungoverned by any standards or laws or degrees. She can pass whatever judgment she likes, but one thing about Giorgio is that she will never sentence Giorgio to be executed. They can be cursed, but they can never be killed outright. And, they certainly won't be welcomed back into any of the Vistani camps after that. When it comes to judgment against Vistani, one of the more typical punishments is banishment, which is sometimes a fate worse than death, because it often results in the Vistani becoming a Mortu if they can't travel with their tribe any longer. We'll get into that a little bit later, what a Mortu is, but it basically translates into the words living dead. The Vistani, most of them would rather die than be banished outright like that. The Vistani language, of course, is called Paterna, and they have a written language system called Tralax. So it's very it's very image intensive. It's almost like hieroglyphics, I guess you could say. A Tralak is like a symbol or a sigil that expresses a whole idea with one single character. It's not like the phonetic alphabet, right, where we spell out words. It's rather that symbol conveys an entire notion. Like they could have a symbol for justice, Vishnad. They could have a symbol for maybe people are upset. They could have a symbol for that. If people are angry, they can have a symbol for that, etc., etc. And this is also where the Vistani have something very similar to thieves can't. They call them paterns or paterns. It's basically just a tongue-in-cheek way of saying patterns, but these are prearranged signals that are left behind by Vistana. Who knows about another particular Vistana who will pass by, so they'll leave them a message. Not dissimilar to, rangers and druids might have their own language that they leave behind in the trees and in the roots that only other rangers and druids would recognize. Similar to that, they leave behind hidden messages that only the other Vistana would be able to spot readily. It's a very fancy system. There are some outliers in the lore, of course. I mean, that's just how it works. These long standing modules that have been around for decades, it's very hard to keep anything straight for very long. Just for example, in 4th edition, the Vistani are planar wanderers, right? So they aren't just in the Misty Lands or the Domains of Dread. They're everywhere. They're all over the place, quite literally. And that they don't have this kind of insular nature where they won't allow foreigners or Giorgios to become a part of their tribe, for example. The 4th edition Vistani are allowed to basically adopt any people that are kind of like-minded of any race, into their own clan. So that's extremely different from the two types of lore. This is kind of in the middle, 4th edition, right? So in 2nd and 3rd edition and in 5th edition, they go back to being this kind of extremely tight-knit, almost xenophobic. They won't allow, anybody other than Vistani, pure-blooded Vistani, to be a part of their clans. But as far as Vistani and Barovia, according to the best sources that I can find, is that the Vistani first appear in Barovia in the year 470. And this is when Madame Eva and Strahd formed their alliance. And I've learned it's very important not to get hung up on dates, because this module has been running for so long. The dates are very convoluted. Things are blatantly pointing against each other all the time. There's conflicting dates and times and info. And, all these years as a dungeon master, I've learned not so much to hand wave it, but that if you're a somewhat resourceful dungeon master, you can find a reasonable way to explain these things, other than, the dark powers did it. One of my favorite ways to address a lot of these inconsistencies is that the Vistani are quite clearly shown to not obey the laws of linear time. What do I mean by that? Here's a very specific example I can give you. When we run our campaigns in Curse of Strahd, if you're following the latest module, the date is supposed to be 735. Okay, so that's the year 735. Through the beginning of the campaign, at some point they're going to meet Madame Eva, the Vistana who runs the camp at the Serra Pool. And she's the one that will do the fortune-telling reading for them, to start the particulars of the campaign, where the fortunes of Ravenloft are all going to be. The holy symbol of Ravenkind, the sun sword, etc., etc. It's very interesting that Madame Eva is allowed to do this because she actually was supposed to have been killed in the year 495. That's right. Madame Eva was killed almost 3 centuries ago by a woman named Jacqueline Montari. It's this really crazy story about a headless woman that, maybe we'll do a lore video on her, but it's an extremely entertaining story. Maybe I'll get around to it in the future. But yeah, so Madame Eva is supposed to have been killed in the year 495 by this woman. But somehow she is around in the year 735 to speak to our player characters and do a fortune-telling reading for them. How do we explain this? Quite simply that the Vistani are not bound by the same laws as everyone else. Particularly, they already demonstrated in the lore with their ability to traverse the mist. And what I like to tell my players is that when they travel, they don't only travel, through space, they also travel through time. So occasionally they may go back a couple of centuries or forward a couple of centuries whenever they're doing their little jaunts through the misted lands and the domains of dread. And that leads them to a very interesting, story in and of itself. These time traveling, quite literally travelers, that move through time and space in ways that we just can't understand sometimes. It's also interesting when they give their fortune tellings. Are they recounting things that they see through some kind of mystical sight, or are they recounting things that they have physically seen because they have been proven to be able to traverse time? So the Vistani are first recorded to have entered Barovia in the year 470, and that is when the supposed alliance between their leader Madame Eva and Strahd had been formed. The relationship between Strahd and the Vistani has changed over the years, of course, and so has this relationship had an impact on the Vistani as a people. So for example, in the original module on the I6, it's Strahd who gives the Vistani, or the Gypsies as they're known back then, the potion that allows them to traverse the mists. This is later retconned to be, oh no, that's not the same mist. It's a different mist. Strahd gave them the potion that renders them immune from the choking fog, the poison that people breathe when they enter Barovia, and that will kill them if they leave Barovia. So this is it's changed to become an entirely different sort of mist we're talking about. Not the mist, capital M, that surrounds every domain of dread and kind of cuts it off from the rest of the domains of dread as a whole. So in the modern module, they do travel under their own power. They have some kind of magical ability as a people, as a race, to just be able to leave the mist or enter the mist to any domain of dread that they please, any of the misted lands at all, and nothing can stop them. And in older lore, they explain that the Vistani must always stay on the move, basically. That if they settle down for whatever reason, if they abandon their nomadic lifestyle, that they will destroy the strange magic that grants them this power to move through the mist. So the Vistani have a biological imperative to keep moving, kind of like sharks, right? If they stop moving, they'll die. So a Vistani or Vistana who's in an area, they can't stay in the same area. I believe it's about a mile for longer than 2 to 7 days. I think it varies, as from Vistani to Vistani. But 2 to 7 days is the norm. And after staying in place for a week, they will come down with static burn or start to suffer the effects of static burn. And it's an illness. So it's kind of like a flu or a fever. And if they can't leave, then they'll eventually start transforming into what's called a mortu. And it just translates into living dead. So they don't have any of the powers of the Vistani. They're pretty much considered outcasts. The Vistani don't consider those people, the mortu, to be Vistani anymore once this occurs. And speaking of outcasts, the Vistani also consider Darklings to no longer be of their people. The Darkling is a member or a previous member of the Vistani people who's been cast out from the tribe. This is normally for something heinous like aiding an enemy of the Vistani, passing on information to the Vistani's enemies, or even murdering another tribe's member. So they're no longer tied to the fabric of the demiplane. Once this happens, the judgment is pronounced by the leader of the tribe, Ruani, which is always a female. And once she pronounces the judgment against them, they are cast out of the tribe and they lose the ability to traverse the mists. And this binds them to wherever the judgment was pronounced, basically. And they eventually become utterly corrupted by that surrounding land. So the Darklings, they look much like their Vistani cousins, but they seem to be almost uniformly gaunt, and their features are sunken and worn, making them look like they've gone too long without food and water. They dress much like other Vistani, and they use this to their advantage. They kind of lose their taste for bright clothes, though, and tend to wear more drab earth tones. Darklings want as little to do with Vistani as possible, but they often prey on normal men and women in the societies that they're now kind of operating around. And they speak the common tongue of men, and are generally familiar with a handful of other languages and dialects. Having been cast out of their society for some crime or wrongful act, they often gather together in gangs of thugs. They take up a life of crime and brutality. They're unable to cross the misty borders between the domains of Ravenloft, but now that the Darkling is basically stuck within one domain, they're usually extremely knowledgeable about that domain. And this imprisonment is extremely painful to them, being a people that was as full as wanderlust as they were before. And this really fuels their desire for vengeance against people that had wronged them. So often, these Darklings will work towards some grand scheme which he feels will allow him to escape the domain that he is imprisoned in, but it almost never comes to fruition. The Darklings lose a lot of their powers that they had as Vistani. In the second and third editions, they still retained some of it, like the foresight and things like that, which gave them bonuses on their saving throws. But in the more modern take on the Darkling is that they kind of just bluff that they still maintain a lot of their Vistani powers, like the evil eye and their ability to tell the future. And they use this to kind of hoodwink people into giving them money sometimes. They'll try and really cling to that mystique of being able to tell the future and to lay curses on people. So Darklings, they usually live alone or in very small bands of thugs. He looks upon the Vistani as cruel people who have done him wrong, and as normal men as pawns and objects of prey. And to the Darkling, the world has committed a great wrong and now owes him a great debt. And, he looks on all material things as his rightful property and takes what he needs without regards for the consequences of his actions. When a Darkling dies, this somehow inexplicably draws the attention of the nearest group of Vistani. If they arrive within a week of the location of the body, they'll bury it and perform an ancient rite designed to soothe the spirit of this tortured brother and allow him to rest in peace. If the ritual is not completed, then it's said that there's a chance that the Darkling will return as a ghast or a wraith, and that it will hunt down all of the people in his previous life to try and transform them into ghouls or wights. And in this way, the Darkling's evil band will plague the lands once again. On to the last type of Vistani, and perhaps the rarest, is the Dukhar. Now, the Dukhar is kind of a prosphesized figure. It's a male Vistani that has the same sight as the Ruani.
For he is the Kwisatz Haderach,
The Vistani normally do not allow this to come to pass, and whenever they have a boy child that is born with the sight, he's immediately put to death. Now, you might consider this a kind of barbarous thing, especially for the Vistani to do, who aren't strictly an evil people, right? What would motivate them to do something like this? Well, it's simple. The Dukhar is basically a prophet who will usher in the Grand Conjunction. What is the Grand Conjunction? It is essentially the apocalypse for the Misted Lands, the Domains of Dread. What will happen is that the Domains of Dread will crash into or unify or kind of transmogrify with the prime material plane, causing great upheavals and destruction across all of the domains. So a real end of days scenario for the Vistani. Spoiler alert for everybody that hasn't read the older lore in the older modules, the Grand Conjunction did come to pass. It eventually happened, and it was prophesied by Dukhar, and that Dukhar's name was Hyskosa. So they curse him still to this day for causing the great destruction that took place during the Grand Conjunction, which the people of the Domains of Dread, they don't call it the Grand Conjunction, they call it the Great Upheaval of the year 740. The Vistani are still paranoid about this coming to pass because a new Dukhar has arisen, and this one is none other than Malakio Adair of Invidia, the actual lord of that realm. Luckily for the Vistani, he is trapped there for the time being, but who knows, maybe he could usher in a new conjunction and bring destruction to the Domains of Dread and the Vistani with it. Now, Strahd's relationship with the Vistani has evolved over the years and modules. Originally, when the Vistani weren't even called Vistani, they were still gypsies. They were Strahd's servants to a T. They would even bring his grave soil outside of Barovia if the story took it that way. They were willing to go the distance for Strahd. They make purchases for him whenever he needs items outside of the realms that he's able to go to. They lure people into his realm, they spy on them, they acquire information for Strahd. So they really were his henchmen more than anything else. That's changed, and I'm glad it changed and evolved over the years. It became much more romantic. It said a lot more about Strahd, really, in the newer lore. His reasons for giving the Vistani such preferential treatment is not only because they're willing to serve him in their own self-interest, of course, but it's also because they saved him. So in the modern module, it's explained that when Strahd was still a mortal man and in his battles against the Turks, he had been wounded and dehorsed during a battle. And of course, the enemies were searching for him to try and finish him off, or maybe to drag him back into captivity before executing him, to try and break the Barovians' armies, So the Vistani had come upon him wounded and unhorsed and had basically taken him into their tribe and brought him back home safe and sound. So they had been attacked and waylaid by some assassins who had been searching for Strahd, and they had shed blood in his defense. So Strahd at this time was very much a warrior and a soldier, and he understood the risk that these people were putting themselves through to protect him. And in return, he gave them this boon that they would always be able to come and go from his realm whenever they pleased. And a lot of people point to this as being the first source of the Barovians' power, because of course originally the Domains of Dread was just made up of Barovia. Strahd was the first Dark Lord of this, a Domain of Dread. And that's canon, and so it's quite possible that Strahd granted these people their power to traverse the realms. Why it took them a couple hundred years and some change to show up later with Madame Eva as it's described in the timeline is another mystery. But that's just, that's just us being logical and thinking in linear time. Now in Barovia, the Vistani have two semi-permanent camps that they maintain, the Serpul Encampment, which is described even in the old lore as being the one place that the Vistani actually keep as a near semi-permanent settlement. That isn't to say that they remain there at all hours of the day, at all days of the week. They do still have to travel because they are Vistani. They always return to the Serpul encampment, so it is occupied more often than not by the Vistani there. The second encampment within Barovia is Luvash's camp, and this is the one that is kind of set in a ring, in a ring fort, or it looks like a hill. And at the top of the hill is the Vistani camp. The bottom of the hill is the Dusk Elf houses, and this is south of Vallaki, a little ways into the Svalak woods. Now, this is more of an encampment that was set up at the Vistani ostensibly to spy on the Dusk Elves, because the Dusk Elves were enemies of Strahd when Strahd had first come to the valley. You know, they had allied against him and had paid the consequences for that. And so now Strahd uses the Vistani to spy on them. You know, they're kind of represented as a broken and people just kind of on the edge of extinction, just waiting out their days. I don't know why he feels that it's necessary to have his Vistani basically live right next door so they can keep an eye on them, but maybe it's just as a way to taunt them and to let them know that until the end of days they're always going to have an eye on them until they all eventually die. The Vistani can be found throughout the module, even as random encounters within Castle Ravenloft itself even. So they're very easy to find, they're very easy to use as a Dungeon Master's tool. And they will always kind of be, it depends on your players I guess, but they will always kind of be a wild card when your players run up against them. Because they're not too sure, because Madame is ostensibly helping. Madame Eva is helping them, right? She's giving them hints on where to find these items they're going to need to defeat Strahd, but at the same time they're questioning, like, why does it seem like all of these Vistani are aiding Strahd? Like, how can she be helping us? Isn't she in charge? You know, or like all these other Vistani, is there some kind of friction in the Vistani community? And, you know, these are questions for you to hash out in your own games. You know, in my game in particular, the one that I'm running right now with my players, Madame Eva is very much trying to end Strahd's curse. And she is going to use the players as a tool to accomplish that. And that about sums up what I wanted to discuss about the Vistani for now, as it relates to the Curse of Strahd campaign. There is so much more lore, of course, but we have so very little time these days. And I just wanted to thank you all for watching. So until next time, I am your DM Eternal.